All right, we're continuing to follow day number 6, and earlier on we heard from the U.S. Central Command location in Tampa, Florida, who oversees the Middle East, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, talking about the U.S. saying they are solely in control of the timeline of activities in Iran, and they will do so, quote, as long as it takes to ensure the United States of America achieves its objectives. A live picture right now. We're continuing to monitor some of these pictures early into the morning hours. This is a live picture there in Beirut, in Lebanon, potentially some Iranian proxy groups getting involved right now. Back to what we heard earlier on today. Hegseth said, quote, we set the tempo, we set the timeline, led by the commander on the ground, saying that the fight has only just begun. Let's continue on here on Live Now from Fox. Bring into the conversation former Defense Department official, prosecutor of counter-terrorism, Omar Qudrat. Thank you so much for joining us here on Live Now from Fox. You wrote an op-ed on foxnews.com about this ongoing conflict and some of the wider implications. You said this is, quote, not another regional flare-up. Why do you feel this conflict is more substantial than that?
Well, first of all, what you're seeing is a decisive military operation that's going to have the type of consequences that could be at minimum decades, if not a century, in terms of setting back anybody who might take leadership in Iran, which is still yet unclear, from being able to threaten the region and threaten the United States. So this military operation that we're seeing alone, the firepower that the United States is putting in play into Iran and degrading and destroying their core military capabilities, this is decisive in that regard. Secondly, this can't be separated from the effects it's having globally, not just regionally, as it relates to a realignment of the global energy order. Now, if you go back to Venezuela, Venezuela now has a more cooperative head of state, and the energy that Venezuela was supplying to adversaries or hostile actors or competitors like China and Russia, they have grown accustomed to under-market oil prices. They have grown accustomed to taking Iran-sanctioned oil and selling it for Iran in these gray markets, and they have enjoyed the benefits of that. If you look at Russia, for instance, the energy that's used to fuel this war in Ukraine is going to shift in terms of a calculus for a head of state like Vladimir Putin. So now with Iran, potentially, we'll see who ends up taking charge of Iran. And President Trump said today that he believes that he should have an active role in deciding who that is. But if we get even a little bit of a better relationship, which, God willing, I don't see anything wrong with that. I think it would be absolutely natural, especially for the majority of the Iranian people, to have a head of state that's friendly and part of the international community. What this does is it completely creates a global energy realignment.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting in terms of the realignment. I want to get into Venezuela in just a little bit. You also mentioned in this op-ed talking about the dependency loop, especially around some of that crude oil with Iran, with China notably as well. Talking about that, they rely obviously on each other. Then why do so? Why close the Strait of Hormuz that is obviously that energy artery in the region?
Well, Iran right now is under an existential threat. And what we saw today and what we heard from the Central Command commander, Admiral Cooper, was that the ballistic missile attacks by Iran have decreased by 90%. What we saw in previous days is an Iran that is unsure of its survival in terms of a regime. So I would say that the number one priority that the Iranian regime appears to have right now is simply survival. Now, they have to decide and calculate with limited resources the expenditure of their ballistic missiles, their cruise missiles, their attack drones, how they manage the Strait of Hormuz in terms of sabotage. This is very consequential, but ultimately the Iranian regime probably calculates that it can't really decide anything if it doesn't survive.
And you also mentioned that President Trump might have a say or wants a say in who comes next in charge. He has been against the son of the Ayatollah. But we talk about what comes next because we talk about regime change. And in the Middle East, the United States really 0 for 3 in this regard, talking about Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. Why do you think this might be different?
Yeah, well, first of all, that's fair. And people in my generation, your generation, and so many others have been on the ground in these situations where we didn't have a very good outcome. What is different here, this is what I would focus on. You have a regime that was hostile to the United States, that killed Americans with impunity for so many years, and it was seeking an ICBM capability, not to have the range to attack a country like Vietnam or wherever else. It's obviously to reach the United States and nuclear capability. So to answer your question, by destroying Iran's military capabilities, worst case scenario, there's a successor that may not be ideal for the United States, but they will be in a position where they cannot threaten the United States regionally, especially in these preceding years where we had hundreds of service members that were killed in Iraq by Iran and their proxies just fomenting chaos and attacking our bases in this very negative cycle that we have tolerated for way too long.
We've seen different levels of optimism from people here in the United States, from lawmakers. It was Republican Senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, that said this potentially could be a gateway to peace in the region. Everyone talks about the Abraham Accords. Is that a possibility? Do you believe that might be on the table if everything goes right?
Well, I have two reactions to that. First of all, what Iran did on Saturday afternoon by attacking 7 sovereign nations, all the GCC, Sunni, Arab, Muslim countries, Israel, and then shortly thereafter, Oman. Iran did more in one afternoon to consolidate an anti-Iranian coalition, an allied coalition consolidating U.S., Israel, and the Sunni Muslim nations against Iran than American diplomacy could ever do in 10 or 20 years. So yes, absolutely, we will start to see signals of normalization, greater normalization of relations into the future. I will just reiterate the point that if there's a leader in Iran that is substandard for our liking, destroying their core military capabilities ultimately is going to answer the question as to what the future is going to look like, and Iran's capability and actions having to do with threatening the United States in the region, having an ICBM program, which, by the way, was built out by China, the biggest ICBM program in the world, and nuclear capability that even the IAEA, which is a little bit understated in terms of assessments, said at least a year ago that Iran was just one short technical step away from gaining nuclear capability.
And this all started on Saturday morning because the United States felt that there was a threat, an imminent threat. That's what President Trump says to the United States and the people about security. But he's talking about the fact that they felt that Iran was going to strike Israel, and then the United States would have to respond in that way. What role does Israel play in all of this in your mind?
Well, what we heard from the president is something that I'm not in the government, so I'm not privy to the information that they may have been looking at in terms of the specific threat. The question about what does Israel have to do with this, I know that there are questions swirling around that. There's lots of analysis and then over-analysis as to Israel's role vis-a-vis America. Israel's objective, at least in the initial period of the military operations, was taking out Iranian leadership, killing people. And the United States' objective was what the president said, the Secretary of War, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We're destroying Iran's core military capabilities.
All right, very good. My last question before I let you go, because at the outset we were talking about some of this and why it was so substantial. You mentioned Venezuela, and that is a key moment because the United States and Venezuela potentially retying those, establishing those ties once more. From the representative from Florida. Carlos Jimenez saying President Trump has demonstrated unparalleled courage, conviction, confronting evil head-on, whether it's Hamas in the Middle East, Maduro regime in Venezuela, the Castro regime in Cuba, the Ayatollah in Iran. Trump has led decisively while others have faltered. And you talked about oil when we're in reference to Venezuela. Did they leave kind of the infrastructure, the blueprint, so to speak, for what's to come with this? Is that just a domino that has fallen?
Yes. What China and Russia do, and Iran as part of the alliance of China, Russia, and Iran, is to create satellite states. Venezuela was a satellite state of China, Russia, and Iran. Iran had a cooperation, including introducing Hezbollah operatives into the Americas through Venezuela. Russia had nuclear-capable bombers that started to be parked in Venezuela. This is a very short flight away from the United States. China had built the substructure of Venezuela's domestic surveillance and communications capability. And if we ended up in a conflict with any of those countries, they would use Venezuela to great military advantage against the United States. It was very important for us not to have a satellite state for China, Russia, and Iran near our nation with nuclear-capable bombers. So the energy, it's great to have friends in the world. The United States promotes peaceful, positive relations and trade relations. That's what we're seeing out of Venezuela, and we're denying a strategic asset and a very sensitive geographic location to hostile militaries.
All right, Omar, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, your insight on how all of this ties really globally all together. Appreciate your time here on Live Now.